Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you for standing by. During this seminar, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation using questions submitted through the chat feature. To ask a question during the presentation, simply type your question in the chat box on the left side of the screen and click the send button for it to go directly to the presenters. If you do not see the chat feature on the left side of your screen, please click the Show Chat button at the top left corner of the meeting screen. And when you submit your question, it will be visible to all panelists, but will not be visible to other attendees. We cannot answer questions about individual medical situations during the seminar. We will attempt to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties during the presentation, you may submit a question through the chat feature, or you may contact technical support at 1-800-843-9166. As a reminder, this presentation is being recorded for replay purposes. Welcome to Affect Change from the Top, a GIST Advocacy Primer. Please remember that information provided in this web seminar is not intended as a substitute for your physician's guidance and care. My name is Sarah Rothschild, the Allergy Program Director, and I am your moderator for today. Welcome. So I wanted to, just one moment as we have people enter the room. Okay, so I wanted to welcome everybody and thank you for joining this webcast. Just to give you an introduction, on July 13th, we will be launching the first GIST Awareness Day. GIST awareness is vital to the future well-being of GIST patients. Thousands of people are living with this cancer, yet many doctors don't know much about it, and many patients are unaware of the programs and services that are available, and research is not being done on a large enough scale. So all this because this cancer has been labeled rare and therefore not as important as other diseases. So we thought it was important to raise much greater awareness for this disease right now to influence our future. So we also need to create a lasting impact on the GIST community by rallying to action right now. And to that end, the LifeRaft Group has launched a 13 Promises campaign, a national advocacy effort to bring the needs of GIST patients directly to top Washington, D.C. policymakers, or if you're in other countries, to your legislative body. So some of these promises include, number one, let's get more funding for GIST research. Other promises include, let's secure a unique GIST reimbursement code, or let's encourage more compassionate use programs. All these are very important, and they have been discussed through our community to us, and we're trying to be responsive to those needs. And there are a number of ways to bring the needs of the community to your local government officials. In addition to the information received here today, you can request that your city or state declare July 13th a GIST Awareness Day. You can also write letters to local policymakers about the 13 promises and bring attention to all these issues, or just pick one issue in particular that speaks to you. It's your choice. But if you want to learn more about it, please visit our website, www.gistawarenessday.org, or go to the LifeRaft Group website, liferaftgroup.org. So we have the pleasure of having 3 panelists today who have experience in different forms of advocacy. So I'm going to introduce them. First, there's Bob Chapman. Bob Chapman is the Director of U.S. Government Global Health Advocacy for the American Cancer Society. Bob leads the Society's global advocacy work inside Washington, D.C. by facilitating relationships with government officials and multilateral institutions such as the State Department, Health and Human Services, U.S. Agency for International Development, World Bank, UN agencies, and foreign embassies. In addition, Bob coordinates legislative advocacy for global health issues before key congressional committees. A key tenet of Bob's job centers around that as cancer increasingly becomes a top cause of death in the world, shaping public health policy on a global level, as well as nation by nation, is critical to achieving the American Cancer Society's global health mission. And prior to working at American Cancer Society, Bob has held positions in the White House, in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and at the Clinton Foundation. Next, we have Thomas Lilburn. Tom is the Director of Federal Relations for Bayer Healthcare. His current responsibilities include representing Bayer Healthcare business interests before the United States Congress and administrative agencies, as well as the executive branch. He has worked professionally in the pharmaceutical industry for over 30 years, beginning his career as a sales representative, progressing through sales, product management, and training. And during the last 23 years of Bayer, he has worked in various assignments, including responsibilities for sales management, industry affairs, managed care, marketing and sales, national distribution, state government affairs, and federal government affairs. And lastly, we have Cindy Chmielewski. She was diagnosed with multiple myeloma in July 2008 after suffering for 2 years with debilitating back pain, misdiagnosed as degenerative disc disease. After several failed treatment attempts, Cindy has found slow but steady success using several of the newly FDA-approved novel agents. Cindy is now in a very good partial remission and continues treatment with a maintenance therapy regime. A distinguished teacher whose career spanned 28 years before her retirement in 2009, she is using her passion for education to teach a new group of students, myeloma patients, and their caregivers. Cindy is on the board of directors of both the Philadelphia Multiple Myeloma Support and Patient Empowerment Network and speaks at support groups across the country, encouraging patients to be active participants in their health care. So we have a very distinguished panel, and I'm sure they would love to answer your questions at the end of this hour. But to start, we are going to have Bob Chapman begin his presentation. Bob, you may begin.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and welcome to everyone on the call. Before I get started, I think I'm going to actually start out by changing the title of the presentation. Instead of it being changed from the top, I'm going to call it Change from the Bottom Up, because grassroots advocacy really is about creating that the demand from constituents and from the electorate and from the citizens in any country for change. Most change at the public policy level rarely happens automatically and without some type of influence. So what I'm going to talk about for the next 15-20 minutes is how to create that groundswell of demand from constituents and from patients in this case, and how to create a true grassroots movement around any one issue. For the purposes of my presentation, I'm addressing the LifeRaft group and the GIST community as a coalition. However, a lot of the points and principles that I'm going to talk about could actually be used by individuals as well. But for the purposes of this call, I'm going to refer most of my statements and my advice to you as a coalition of like-minded patients in one patient group. Advocacy and public policy can be quite complex. I've been in this city in Washington, D.C. for some 25 years now, and I still haven't quite figured it all out. The United States is only about a little over 230 years old as a democracy, and we have not perfected it just yet, but it's still the best system that we've got going that I've been able to identify in my lifetime. Having said that, it takes a long time and a lot of work and a lot of understanding to understand a complex process. So keeping that in mind, 20 minutes is not going to do justice to make you fully aware of everything and every nuance that is important to understand when you're trying to influence public policy. But I am not trying to make you an expert. In fact, I'm going to tell you that you do not need to become an expert in public policy or even advocacy. There are other people out there who do that for a living. What you need to understand is some very basic principles in order to have an effective advocacy program and to be an effective advocate for yourself or in coalition with others. So before I begin with my presentation, I have a couple of questions for each of the participants. I'm going to click through and present to you a couple of questions here, and if you could go ahead and answer them. I'll give you 30 seconds to answer each of these questions. It will help me get a sense of your experience level in each of these areas. So have you ever given a media interview or sent a letter to the editor of a newspaper? Click yes or no. The second question I'm going to ask is, have you ever been to your elected official's office in Washington, D.C., or in your local district back home in your state or city? Click yes or no. And the final question is, do you know who your senators or your representatives are in Congress? If you're in the United States, each of us has 2 elected representatives in the House of Representatives, 2 senators from each state and 1 House representative from each of our congressional districts. If you know who they are, click yes or no if that's the case. So before I start talking about patient advocacy, or I should say grassroots advocacy 101, it really is important for us to define what advocacy is. Because when people talk about advocacy, we're usually talking about 2 different types of advocacy. You can break it down into 2 different definitions. One is patient advocacy, and I know we're going to allude to this and talk about it as well. Patient advocacy is really mostly concerned with patient education from an individual level. So when you are a patient, you go into a hospital, you're seeing your doctor, or you are part of a clinical trial, either the law or the protocol or maybe that health system's rules and bylaws entitle you to certain standards of care and certain rights. So patient advocacy is really about that individual ensuring that you're entitled, you're getting everything, every level of care and the attention to the rights that you are given either under the law or under certain protocols or by the institution that you're receiving care from. So, for example, you may be entitled to a second opinion under your health insurance plan, and that is covered. That's an example where you're demanding a second opinion and you want to be reimbursed for that. That's patient advocacy. What I'm going to focus on is public policy advocacy. These are efforts to change the laws of the land or laws in your state, and in some cases even global health policy, which is what I'm involved in. But efforts to change laws at the state, local, and the federal level is really public policy advocacy. It's changing legislative outcomes through your government and through your legislature in order to affect policy changes for the entire population, not just for one individual or a small group of individuals. So a good example of that here in the United States would be the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. That's an example where the law of the land has changed and everyone is pretty much affected under that law. That's the type of advocacy I'm going to talk about in the rest of my presentation. Since it is complex and I only have a few minutes, I'm going to break everything down into Bob's principles. And through each of these principles, which I hope are somewhat memorable for you, I'll be able to talk through the points that I would normally make in a much longer presentation or training module. So the first one is, if you don't know where you're going legislatively, any road will get you there. And what I mean by that is you have to have a policy goal or objective. What is it that you want to change? What is it that you want to improve? What is the problem that you're trying to solve from a public policy perspective? This is important, and before you even start engaging any type of advocacy tactics or steps whatsoever. Because if you don't have a strategy, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. This is one of the most critical mistakes I think many organizations and even individuals make when they're engaging in grassroots advocacy. They really don't know what is the outcome that they're looking for. So it's important, embedded in that first principle, is to know where you're going. What is your long-term plan? Do you have message development? And do you know when you're actually going to win what you're seeking to win? So your goals and your objectives really should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. You really need to know when you've won what it is you're seeking to win. So if you don't know where you're going legislatively, any road will get you there. Know where you're going first before you start out. The other point I wanted to make is just as many decisions about your health are made in legislative offices than in your doctor's office. And I'm going to prove that point in a moment. But that's another principle that I think is very important to understand on why advocacy, grassroots advocacy from the bottom up, is very important. Health is as much a matter of public policy as it is a medical and scientific issue. A lot of the health care that we receive or that we should be receiving is somehow regulated, funded by, and affected, certainly affected by some form of government policy. And I'm sure my other co-presenters are going to refer to this as well as good examples. So it's important to understand that we do need to engage our government, we do need to be involved in public policy, and we need to be influencing that process. Principle number 4, in Washington, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. This is a common adage here in Washington, D.C. And simply what it means is you need to be engaged. If you're not represented, either by other coalitions or other representatives, such as your elected officials or experts that are working for the Life Rec Group, etc., well, then simply you're not part of the solution and you're going to be forgotten about. Simply because we have a really good cause, as just patients do, anyone who is fighting for cancer, good public health policy has. Simply because you have a good story to tell and a good cause doesn't mean you're going to win on its merit. You really do need to be engaged. There's an incredible amount of competition in any government, in any legislature, with competing priorities. So if you're not there on that public policy debate and you're not shaping the discussion, then there's a good chance you're going to be left out of the solution or left out of the equation. In fact, it might even do harm because your programs may not be funded at all, and your priorities simply may not be even visible to the legislators. So if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Principle number 5, bad things happen when good people do nothing. I usually use this principle when I'm doing training because usually the first response I get from constituents here in the United States and also others, advocates around the world and other countries is, Bob, there's an incredible amount of corruption in my country or in my state. Politicians aren't out for my interest. They don't care about my interest or my health care. There's other bigger interests with a lot more money than I have. It's not even worth trying. This is what I usually hear. And what I usually respond with is, bad things happen when good people do nothing. You're certainly right. You can sit back at home and do nothing and not engage in this process. The process will continue. Legislation will be enacted. Public policies will be implemented. But they may not be in our favor. So we have to be part of that discussion and part of that public policy debate. My mother always told me when I came to Washington, she says, there's 2 people attracted to power, Bob. Those who are out to benefit themselves and those who are here to benefit others. And she said, stick with the second group because there's a lot less competition. So you have to be in it to win it. It's like the lottery. Principle number 6, simple. Pick cherries where cherries grow. What does that mean? It simply means is that our efforts must be targeted. If you look at the U.S. Congress, you have 535 individuals all trying to compete with each other for their constituents' benefit, hopefully, or someone's benefit. And you have to know at every step of the legislative process, whether it's at the local, state, or federal level, or at the global level, who is it that has the power to affect change for your issue? The Congress doesn't always vote, in this case in the United States, doesn't vote on every single issue unilaterally all the time. It's a legislative process, and it starts usually with one individual in the legislature, or maybe one small group of individuals, and then a committee process where the debate has to be discussed. It's a slow-moving process, and at any step of that process, you need to know who has the power and who has the ability to move your issue forward. It's not always a 535 members of Congress. In fact, it's very rare that that would happen. It's usually one or two individuals, the chairman of a committee, for example, or maybe it's the mayor or someone on the city council or someone in your state legislature. So you have to identify who is it that has the power to affect change for you at any given moment. So you got to pick cherries where cherries grow. Point number 7 is you really are the expert when it comes to GIST and for your health situation. For everyone else, there's the Library of Congress. What do I mean by that? One of the big mistakes that advocates usually make at the grassroots level is they come to Washington or they meet with their elected officials and somehow they think they have to brush up on every statistic they can remember and put in their mind, and they have to become an expert on the science and on the disease, etc. And what they miss is telling their story, which is what you are the expert at. Congress and the federal government has all the information they want and need at their disposal. It's actually why the Library of Congress exists. They have all the researchers, armies of researchers that can get them the data. You do not need to become an expert in the data, and you certainly shouldn't be intimidated by the mountain of information that you think you need to know before engaging your lawmakers. So you are the expert. Don't try to remember everything. Tell your personal story. That's what you're expert at. No one else can put themselves in your shoes and with your experience. Point number 8, advocacy begins at home. Make it local. What does that mean? We tend to forget, certainly in the United States, that our members of Congress spend most of their time all year long back home in their legislative districts or in their states. A lot of the work that they do is not here in Washington, D.C. So you need to engage your elected officials at the local level. And when you're talking about the news media and talking to, writing letters to the editor, for example, you do need to do it at the local level. Members of Congress here in the United States read the newspapers, not necessarily the ones here in Washington, D.C. Their constituents are not here in Washington, D.C. Their constituents are at home in their state or in their local district. So that's where you need to be engaged, and that's where you need to understand who your staff, your elected representatives, where their district offices are, where their Senate offices are, who are their staff people at that local district. That's where you need to engage first and foremost. You don't need to travel to Washington, D.C. In fact, it's much more effective if you engage at the local level, in your community. That's what elected officials respond to. That's what they monitor. So advocacy begins at home. Make it local. Point number 9, sometimes a good defense is the only offense. What do I mean by that? There are going to be times, many times actually, where good advocacy requires us to be opposing bad legislation or opposing a bill that's not in our favor, or possibly defending against budget cuts. For example, here in the United States, as you all know, budgets are tight. And there's a constant battle and a constant public policy debate here in Washington about where our limited dollars and resources will go. And it's often the case that someone is coming after and trying to cut money that you want to protect. In fact, you want to see that budget grow, but others want to take it away and reprioritize it for other programs. That's a good example where a good defense might be your only offense. It's quite often that sometimes taking 2 steps back instead of 3 steps back is actually a victory. Point number 10, hold decision makers and staff accountable. Thank them when necessary, publicly if warranted. And what does that mean? If you're engaging with your lawmakers at any level, it's important that you stay engaged on the issue and track their responsiveness to your efforts. Advocacy is not a one-day event. It's not a one-time engagement. It is a process. It takes continued and persistent effort over usually a long period of time, and you need to track to see what have your legislators done to respond to your request. So you've got to stay engaged. You've got to get to know who their staff are. Most senators and representatives here in the United States, or most elected officials for that matter, are not expert in all the issues that they have to contend with on a regular basis. They are surrounded by staff people who are the experts. And in most cases, in many cases I should say, when a member of Congress or any other legislator has to take a vote, chances are they're going to consult with the expert on their staff about what the decision, what the issue is, and what the details are, what the facts are, etc. That staff person has an enormous amount of power. So I encourage you to get to know who the staff people are. And if they're doing the right thing, thank them. Elected officials love to be thanked. It's very important that you follow up and thank them publicly if it's warranted, either through a letter to the editor or an email or an advertisement or anything like that. If the law provides for it or doesn't prohibit it and you're able to engage in that form of advocacy, then you should always thank your legislators. There may be times, and this is where the bonus point comes in, there may be times when you have to criticize your elected officials, where you really have to play hardball, and you've got to call them out for making the wrong decision or not making the right decision. And the point I would make there with the bonus question, or the point is, the toes you step on today might very well be connected to a part of the body you have to kiss tomorrow. So that's a precaution, and don't always go for the jugular. Don't always go for the desire to criticize and attack elected officials. You're going to get a lot more through honey than you're going to with vinegar there. So that's my bonus point there. So what other actions can you take alone? Well, the first point is realize you're not alone. We're all standing on the shoulders of others who've come before us, certainly when it comes to legislation and public health policy here in the United States. So you're not alone. The fact that we're on this call together as a group, as a coalition, proves my point. You're not alone. You're not doing this alone. Join coalitions. If there are other coalitions, the Life for F Group, Allianz Gist, and others, is a great example of coalitions where we can combine our efforts and resources, harmonize our message and our policy and legislative ask, and we can come in as a bigger voice. Build a relationship with your decision makers. You don't need to be part of a coalition to do this. In fact, you should be doing it anyway. There's no need to be intimidated or to feel like your elected officials are unapproachable. Certainly their staff, you're paying for them to be responsible to you, to listen to you. So it's quite normal for constituents to build that relationship with them. Go in and visit their office or send them an email or correspond with them via in any form that works for you, or pick up the phone and call them. That's what they're there for. It's very common. So build that relationship. Other forms of advocacy, certainly grassroots advocacy, again, call, write, visit, email, and vote. Your ultimate power rests in your ability to vote your elected officials in and out of office, and that's where your ultimate accountability rests. The other point, be consistent and persistent. Again, a lot of organizations and individual advocates make this mistake of not being consistent with their messaging and not asking over and over and over again for what they want and what they deserve. They give up or they change their message time in and time out, and it becomes one blurry message. It's not consistent. This is even more important when you're going to go in and engage your lawmakers as a coalition or as a group. It is important that you're going in and you're talking with the same message consistently. Other point I would make is celebrate victories, no matter how small. This is an important tip for you in the grassroots advocacy process. When you do get a win, no matter what it might be, whether it's a co-sponsor of a piece of legislation, or you are adding champions to your cause, or you get a bill introduced into the legislature, celebrate it. It's not the outcome that you're looking for. That individual step is not going to change public policy all by itself. But when you get them, you should celebrate them. It builds momentum, and everyone wants to be part of a winning team. So every opportunity you get To mark an accomplishment and an achievement, celebrate it. For those of you in the United States, and I'm sure many countries around the world, you're here in the U.S., the best source of information for how to go about finding who your senators and who your representatives are is to go to congress.gov. If you go to that site, bookmark it, and there you'll see a box up on the top that'll ask you, asking the question, who my representative is. And you can go in and put your zip code and your address, and it'll tell you who your representative is and all the contact information and biographical information you will need about that individual. In addition, it'll tell you where, what committees that senator or representative is working on. You'll also be able to navigate and track legislation if a piece of legislation has been introduced that you want to track. It's very searchable. It's quite easy. I shouldn't say it's quite easy. It's going to be a little bit complicated and intimidating to get started, but once you get used to it, you'll understand it. You can also brush up on the basics of the federal legislative process using congress.gov. Many of us learned this stuff in 4th grade and forgot about it. It is complicated. You don't have to be an expert at it, but if you do want to take the time to understand it better, you can go to congress.gov and brush up. So the last point I would make is no one should battle cancer alone. Join the fight. You've all heard the saying from, a small group of people is the only thing that's ever changed public policy or have done great things, and that's true. But we prove every day here through grassroots advocacy that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. And that's really the point that I want to make. I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I look forward to your questions after the presentations are over.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob. Excellent tips that you provided us. Just real quick, would you like to go over the polling results now, or should we wait till the end? Bob?
We can wait till the end.
Okay. All right, so if anybody has any questions, still feel free to type them in the chat window and we can ask them at the end. Now I'm going to hand this over to Tom from Bayer.
Well, thank you. And I will just start by saying that I agree with virtually everything that Bob had to say and their direction on trying to get grassroots activity. All of those things are absolutely true, and you can make a difference. What I've been asked to talk about just a little bit are how the pharmaceutical industry helps support advocacy and the day-to-day things that we do here in Washington. Bayer has an Office of Legislative Affairs here. Most of the large pharmaceutical companies do, and the medical device companies, people who are in the healthcare field. And we work with members of Congress. We work most of the time with their staffs. We try to represent the interests, certainly, of the company, but also the interest of our patients for whom we make the medicines. We work very hard and very long to try to get cures and medications that can help all kinds of diseases. Certainly Bayer is in the oncology field, and we've done some of those things. I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the challenges. Bob has alluded to a few of them. Funding is always one of those challenges. And we work with a number of our compatriots. We work with the patient groups. We work with outside groups that have like designs in helping get funding. Specifically, I'll talk first about the NIH. The NIH doing basic science as opposed to clinical and developmental science such as the pharmaceutical industry specifically does. The basic science is necessary. In a lot of cases, our industry partners with NIH in bringing along the products and the intellectual property that they sometimes develop, but they are funded through the government. And as Bob alluded to, there have been problems recently in getting funding. as we talk to members of Congress, as we talk to people in the House and people in the Senate, we are forever trying to get people who will work to increase appropriations, in the case of NIH through a specific committee, labor, health, science. And what we would like to do is increase those amounts so that they can then be divided down into the many different institutes, including the Cancer Institute at NIH, and increase the grants. Right now in cancer, about 79% of all cancer grants go unfunded. And we need to change that, and hopefully if we continue the pressure on Congress, we can get some funding increases. We had the shutdown of the government back a while ago. That shutdown in government hurt NIH. The sequestration that was an answer to runaway government spending hurt the NIH. And right now their budget is basically flat. There are no increases being predicted. The President's budget that he put forward did include about a 0.7% increase, $211 million for the NIH budget, but the President's budget did not end up being enacted. The labor HHS bill that will be coming up later in this year, the appropriations bill, probably won't carry any increases in basic science funding either. So that's something that the industry will continue to work on. We'll do it through our different associations. Bayer Healthcare is a member of the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers Association, a trade association of all the research-based pharmaceutical companies. We're a member of the Biotechnology Industries Organization, or BIO, both of which work very hard to increase those appropriations. So NIH funding is just one part of that. Some of the other things that we do are more geared towards making sure that reimbursement stays at least where it is, if not increased, for the federally funded programs. Certainly one of the largest is Medicare. And in Medicare, neoplastics have enjoyed a protected class, as it's called, for Part D reimbursed drugs, Part D being the pharmaceutical program that was added back in 2003 to Medicare. Part D has 6 protected classes of drugs, as I said, one of them being neoplastics. Last year, CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Reimbursement, decided that they would take another critical look at these protected classes that must be reimbursed by the Part D providers, and said that they were going to basically eliminate the protection for 3 of those classes. The neoplastics were not one of those classes that they said they would eliminate the protection for, but most people here in Washington felt that it was a very slippery slope to go down, and that if they could make that change to what Congress had enacted, that it would eventually end up being a change in the neoplastics also. So our industry worked very, very hard. Bayer worked hard. We lobbied in the Senate along with lots of colleagues, including the American Cancer Society. And almost, I think it may have been all, but almost every senator signed on to a letter in a bipartisan fashion asking CMS not to change that criteria. It was one of those really big wins that Bob was talking about that we were able to put in the win column, and CMS actually revised their proposed rule, and in May came out and said that they would not at this time make any changes to the protected classes. So for a little bit of time, we could heave a sigh of relief and make sure that that reimbursement continued. One of the other things that I wanted to mention that we do on a regular basis is the interaction between Congress, the originators or innovators of drugs, and the FDA. The FDA now has, because of some new legislation, designated 4 expedited programs. And these programs allow for some changes in the normal 12-year period that the industry goes through to get a drug approved. Those programs are a fast-track program, a new breakthrough therapy program, an accelerated approval program, and a priority review program. And each one of them has different criteria on what they're looking for and how to get new therapies through the FDA and out to patients as quickly as possible. Certainly the breakthrough therapy is a relatively new one. It's a drug that's intended to have to treat serious conditions, and that there's preliminary clinical evidence that indicates that the drug may demonstrate some type of substantial improvement on a clinically significant endpoint. I know that sounds like a big mouthful, and it is, but what it means is if there is a drug in development or a compound that has come forward and it may not have extensive clinical development yet, there may not be extensive clinical trials, but there are endpoints or markers that make it look like this may be a breakthrough, then the FDA and the sponsor, the innovator, can bring that forward, and they can look at that drug in a new pathway that may move it much more quickly through the FDA and get it to patients more quickly. So, that's the type of thing that industry helps do. It actually was requested by the biotechnology industry because a lot of those small companies, as I sometimes refer to them, 3 scientists and an idea, have a compound that may be able to help but doesn't have all of the evidence there already, and it gets to the patient. So far, just looking at the numbers, there's been 178 applications for breakthrough designation so far. The FDA has granted 44 of them. 14 of those were for cancer drugs. 6 of them have gotten approvals, and 4 of those approvals have been for cancer drugs. So it takes a large net to bring in 4 drugs, but it's something that both the biotechnology industry and the pharmaceutical industry work hand in hand in trying to get through and get drugs out to patients. I think that probably is an example of each of the areas that we work in here in Washington. We work with groups in grassroots programs, as Bob was talking about. I'm very enthusiastic about the idea of having more advocates out there. I'd just like to put a plug in and stress that your voice is the most important voice in carrying this message forward with members of Congress and the House of Representatives. They do listen to what you say. They listen to what you say a heck of a lot more than they listen to people like me. You are the ones that are their constituents. The numbers, the facts, the figures all show that they will respond to constituents 89 to 95% of the time. They will listen to what you're saying. It doesn't take an awful lot to get them listening. there have been studies that have shown that 10 letters get them to take notice, that simply 20 to 30,000 comments of some type, be it Facebook or Twitter, will also get them to sit up and start to take notice. So what grassroots advocates do with their elected members of Congress is extremely, extremely important and will get results. I'm a big, big believer in that. So with that, I'll end my part of this and turn it back to Sarah.
Thank you very much, Tom. Your presentation was fascinating, and some of the statistics that you brought up were things that I know many of us here at the LRG haven't heard before, so it was very informative for us. So if anybody has any questions for Tom, feel free to type them in so we can ask them at the end. So now I would like to turn this over to our last panelist, Cindy, who is a survivor and an advocate, and she will provide her perspective with advocacy. Cindy, you can begin. Cindy, just if you've muted your line, please unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that was the trick, unmute. Okay, my name is Cindy, and I'm a myeloma patient, and myeloma is a rare form of blood cancer. And today I'm just going to give you my perspective as a patient, what it means to be an advocate. Well, so let me see, do I press it twice? My slides don't seem to be advancing.
Yep, just double-click the slide, and then you can advance. Or we can do it for you.
Okay. You could go to the next slide then. Okay, thanks. So what does it mean to be an advocate? If you asked me that question about 6 years ago, I probably wouldn't have had an answer for you. 6 years ago, I was a 5th grade science and math teacher, and my biggest concern was if I could teach my children how to do long division or if they would pass the New Jersey Ask. But now fast forward 6 years later, and now I'm a retired educator, a multiple myeloma survivor, and a patient advocate. Go to the next slide. Okay, I learned about advocacy a little bit at a time. First, I had to learn how important it was for me to advocate for myself at a doctor's visit. And for me, that required a lot of practice. I was brought up in an age where the doctor knew best. Patients just followed their doctor's orders. Asking questions and seeking second opinions did not come naturally to me. I thought I was going to offend my doctor if I did so. But little by little, I began to educate myself. And that part came naturally to me because I was a teacher. And then I started to speak up at appointments. That part was a little bit harder. But I would challenge myself to ask at least one question at each consultation. Gradually, I became more comfortable engaging in discussions with my doctors. And now, when I go to my appointments, I sometimes have discussions with my doctors about journal articles. I ask them questions about various treatment options that I've been reading about. And I even sometimes request a test that I think I might need done. So I've changed into somebody who's now an equal part of their healthcare team. I could go on to the next slide. So once I felt comfortable advocating for myself, I knew it was important to share what I learned with others about self-advocacy. I wanted to encourage my fellow travelers how important it is to be active participants in their own health care. And doing this was going to give me a renewed purpose in life. I was fortunate enough to be chosen to be a patient ambassador, which allowed me to travel throughout the country speaking to cancer support communities. I would encourage patients that it was very important to educate themselves, to find support, and to make sure their voice was heard. I'm also an active member in my in-person myeloma support group and several online myeloma communities. I also shared what I learned about self-advocacy to people that I mentored. Okay, and my next slide is, in time, I became more involved with the cancer community, and I began to volunteer at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. I also joined various patient advocacy groups, such as the American Cancer Society's Cancer Action Network, who we heard from today, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society's Advocacy Group, and the International Myeloma Foundation's Action Team. And for the most part, what these groups wanted me to do was to write to my congressperson about various issues facing cancer patients, such as some of the drug shortages we were experiencing, the cuts in research funding that we heard about earlier, and about oral chemo parity. So I did this, and this was easy because I was getting email alerts, and the email alert would contain a link right to my representative and a form letter to send. The only thing I had to do at the time was add just a few lines about my own cancer story before I clicked the submit button. The next slide. I also became more involved in my local myeloma support group. My support group leader asked me if I would be able to represent our community at the annual support group leaders conference, which was sponsored by the International Myeloma Foundation. I agreed, and off to Dallas I went. As I was registering for the summit, I was approached by two young women who introduced themselves as the IMF Grassroots Advocacy Team. They knew I was already signed up to receive the action alerts and inquired if I would be interested in participating in their newly launched Advocacy 101 webinar, 10 Steps to Meeting Your Legislator. Well, being a teacher, I'm always up to learning something new, so I registered for that web event. And the next slide. The webinar was scheduled for the following month. During the educational event, I learned everything I would need to know to set up an in-district meeting with my representatives to Congress. I was given the background information about my topic. I was given a template to use to compose my personal story, letters to send to set up a meeting, a follow-up thank you letter, tweets to send after my meeting, and I even had to set up leave behind material. It was a really great webinar. I learned a lot, and I was very glad that I participated. But I didn't feel I was quite ready to set up an in-district meeting. Political advocacy was something new to me, and I was still lacking some confidence. Okay, and the next slide. But then the phone call came. It was July, and Congress was out of session for the summer. Megan from the International Myeloma Foundation wanted me to set up an in-district meeting with my state representatives and asked him to sign on as a co-sponsor to the Cancer Drug Parity Act. He was on one of those committees that had a lot of influence. I was hesitant at first to do this because politics is really new to me. Questions were racing through my head, like what was I going to say to him? Would my congressman really take me seriously? And what if he asked me something I didn't know about? But I did decide to challenge myself and set up a meeting. This took a lot of persistence on my part. But after several emails back and forth to my local representative's office, a date was finally set. Megan coached me every step along the way. We even had a mock rehearsal meeting. The actual meeting went well, and I'm happy to report that Rush Holt decided to sign on as a co-sponsor of the bill. I would like to think that it had something to do with my meeting. It was at that point I realized the importance of patient stories and our testimonies. The next slide. While the federal government was working on the Cancer Drug Parity Act at the national level, several of the state governments were trying to pass similar state bills. Early in January 2012, Governor Christie signed the Oral Chemo Access Bill into law in New Jersey. New Jersey joined several other of the states in providing equitable insurance coverage of orally administered cancer treatments. I was asked by Gina Londino, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society's Patient Services Manager, to attend a press conference at the State House that was going to spotlight New Jersey's new Oral Chemo Access Act. Prior to the actual press conference, we were privileged to meet Senator Weinberg, who was very responsible for passage of the bill. She insisted that the patient should also speak at the press conference, that the public wanted to hear the patient's stories. We weren't prepared to do this, so once again I was hesitant, but I decided that I would speak. I thanked Governor Christie for enacting his legislation. I explained that often the only available treatment option for patients is an oral chemotherapy. I also explained that over half of the new agents being developed to treat cancer will be oral drugs, and that patients don't choose an oral drug over an IV because they don't like needles, but because it offers them the best chance for survival. And prior to passing this legislation, a cancer patient could be responsible for thousands of dollars of monthly prescription copays, possibly for the rest of their lives. And the next slide. Thanks to the IMF and the LLS, I found my voice and learned the importance of sharing my story. Personal stories have tremendous impact. As a teacher, I know that learners acquire information the best through story. Storytelling is an ideal teaching and learning tool. Stories are very powerful. I've had the privilege to attend the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society annual Mission Day in Washington, D.C. During Mission Day, patients and advocates from across the country meet with elected officials to spread the word about the need to find a cure for blood cancers and to improve the lives of blood cancer patients. The most powerful tool we have in convincing our legislators to support a bill is our personal stories. On our next slide. I've learned how important it is to make my voice heard and to share my personal story. Now I'm encouraging others to do the same thing, both for themselves and for issues that are related to their care. This past fall, I had the opportunity to work with Gina, the Patient Services Manager at LLS, at our local Light the Night walk. I was the advocacy chairperson for this event. During Light the Night, I distributed advocacy materials to the attendees. I led social media updates. I collected advocacy signatures from the Light the Night participants for cancer-related legislation, and I signed up attendees to become part of the LLS Advocacy Network so they too could receive the advocacy action alerts. And finally, my final slide, I've also learned about the world of advocacy when I attended the American Association for Cancer Research's annual meeting as a patient advocate. Today I've touched upon support and political advocacy. But advocacy comes in other forms too. There's fundraising, research, and watchdog advocates, speaking out on issues that they care about and offering ways to improve about them. But that will be a webinar for another day. And thank you so much for giving me this time to share my perspective.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and also to Bob and Tom for your time today and giving us some wonderful insight on all your different forms of advocacy. Before we head to questions, I just wanted to go back to Bob and see if you wanted to just kind of go over some of the polling that we did earlier in the call today, just to get a sense of our participants and their experience.
Well, there you go. I think the results are beneficial for all of us to get a glimpse of the profile of those who are participating. Seems like a 50-50 split. Those who sent letters to the editor corresponding with the media, if you do it right, is actually a great form of advocacy. On the question of whether or not you've been to your congressman's office in Washington, D.C. or your district, we've got a lot of work to do. So you can take the first step by going to congress.gov if you're here in the United States and find out who your representative and your senators are, and then see where their office is. And again, you don't have to actually go there. You can just make a phone call or send them a note. That works too. And then if you know who your senators and representatives are in Congress, well, those numbers look pretty good. So good results on that front. And probably the 12% who answered no are probably, I'd suspect some of them are outside the United States. That's maybe not applicable. But there you go. So it's good information for all of us to get a sense.
Now, Bob, is there a better time of day or year to get in touch with the elected officials? Can you give us some sense of that?
That is a great question, and the congressional schedule in terms of when members of Congress come here to Washington, D.C. does actually change every year. It's up to both chambers of the Congress to decide what that schedule is. But quite often, Congress is in session usually from Tuesday through Thursday. That's the average when they are in session. Members of Congress will come from their states and their districts, travel to Washington, D.C., and conduct the business here in Washington, D.C. When they're not here in Washington, they're usually home in their states and their districts talking with their constituents. So the weekends are a good time to probably catch, or a Friday maybe, or a Monday, good time to catch the member in their district office. But again, the folks who are here in Washington and those who work in the district offices, the staff are probably there full time. So there's a good chance you're not going to get a chance to see your member of Congress unless you make an appointment well in advance, or you're coming in with a large group. Again, the staff person and the legislative health expert for that member of Congress is the person you really want to see.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. We're really out of time. I'm just going to throw out one question that somebody had asked. Will there be letter templates for sending to the local officials be posted on the LRG website? And so we are in touch with Bob and some others in terms of some templates that can be used to help approach elected officials. And also, we're very excited to announce that in conjunction with the Just Awareness Day, we will be joining the coalition One Voice Against Cancer the week before on July 7th and 8th, and we're going to be joining many other cancer groups and really pushing to see what we can do to increase more federal funding for cancer research. And through that training, we will be receiving a lot of good materials and some templates that we can help distribute to our community. So we can definitely circulate that around that time. But also, we're going to try and put some more advocacy resources on our website and send that off to the community so that you can take these materials and use it as you deem fit to see what we can do to affect change. So if any of the speakers want to say any other comments, I will open it up to them. Otherwise, I'm going to close the meeting. Anybody would like to say any parting words? Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This webcast will be archived on our website shortly. Also, if anybody is interested still in getting involved with the Just Awareness Day and our 13 Promises campaign, please go to our website, liferaftgroup.org, and also the campaign site, justawarenessday.org, and you can read more about it. Thank you very much to everybody who participated today. Thank you to our panelists for your time today. And we look forward to hearing some positive change in the near future. Thank you to all.
Oh, you're welcome.
Take care. Bye-bye.